Wel, prynhawn da unwaith eto I chi gyd. This is the week in which we carry out the latest review of the Alert Level 4 restrictions here in Wales, and this is the fourth review of the stay-at-home measures. Now, the background to all of this is that since the new year, the public health situation in Wales has been steadily improving. And this is thanks to everything that has been done. Staying at home, working from home, homeschooling children. It is your actions and all your sacrifices that have helped to bring coronavirus under control. And that hard work has helped to save lives. Earlier this week, there was a day when Public Health Wales reported that no one in Wales had died from coronavirus. It's been sadly a long time since we last had a day when no deaths were reported. And I hope that there will be many more days to come when families here in Wales will not have the terrible news that a loved one has died from this awful disease. And there is hope that we are heading into that territory. We continue to see falls in the number of cases of coronavirus in the community. The latest figures show that there are around 41 cases per 100,000 people in Wales, and that's the lowest level we've seen since mid-September last year. Nevertheless, there are some variations in the rates across Wales. Some parts of Wales have higher rates than this 41 case level, and we're carefully watching cases in the under 25s, because in the past this has acted as an early warning system for increases that may be to come. The positivity rate is now stable at 4.3%, and the latest results from the ONS infection survey just published suggests that Wales has the lowest rates in the United Kingdom. And at the same time, the number of COVID-related patients in hospitals is falling faster now every week. And the vaccination figures, just published in the last 15 minutes, have the highest number of vaccines reported in a single day in Wales at over 38,000. This is all very good news. Now, at the last 3-week review, I said that if public health circumstances continued to improve, we would be able to take some bigger steps forward in relaxing the restrictions. And while the figures I have just set out give us grounds for optimism, we have to be cautious too, because they do not tell the whole story. We're coming out of lockdown with a much more infectious form of the virus present everywhere across Wales. We also have a small number of cases of other mutations of the virus that originated overseas. And we know that as soon as we relax the rules and people begin to mix again, there is an inevitable risk that infections will rise. If we do too much too quickly, we will lose control of the virus, and that will set off a new wave of infections. And then we would be back at the beginning again, having to reimpose strict measures to protect people's health and save lives. It's in order to avoid all that from happening that our approach will continue to be careful and cautious. We will take a phased approach to unlocking each sector, as we already have with schools. We will make step-by-step changes each week, gradually to restore freedoms, and we will monitor each change we make so that we can track its impact. Now, the priority of this Welsh Government remains to get as many children back into school in face-to-face learning as possible, as safely as possible. But in our phased approach, we also have some headroom to make other changes to the rules, again, in a phased way. And this slide highlights some of the major changes over the coming weeks. From tomorrow, we will lift the stay-at-home requirement and replace it with stay local. And that will be in place for the next few weeks. 4 people from 2 households will be able to meet outdoors, including in gardens. Outdoor facilities for sport can reopen. They can be used locally by up to 4 people from those 2 households. And indoor care visits will restart for a single designated visitor. From Monday, the 15th, all primary age pupils and those sitting for qualifications in secondary school will return to face-to-face learning. Schools will have flexibility beyond that to bring Year 10 and 12 pupils back, and more learners will return to college. And there will also be flexibility for in-school check-ins for all other pupils. All pupils will return in the 3rd phase after the Easter break immediately on the 12th of April. From Monday the 15th, hairdressers and barbers will reopen for haircuts by appointment, and if the public health position remains positive, all close contact services will reopen from the 12th of April. From the 22nd of March, non-essential retail will begin to reopen. We will start by lifting the restrictions on what the shops which are currently open can sell. Garden centres will also reopen from the 22nd. And once again, if the public health position remains positive, all non-essential retail shops will be able to open from the 12th of April, the same date as in England. Now, I want to try and give as much of an indication as I can of what will happen beyond the next 3 weeks. So if the public health situation continues to improve, we will lift stay local on March the 27th and begin the process of opening up our tourism sector, starting with self-contained accommodation. Organised children's outdoor activities will also be able to restart in time for the Easter holidays, and libraries will reopen so the children will be able to use them as well. Both the slides you have just seen will be on our social media channels and our website so that people can check the dates and information in slower time. Now, to help all those businesses which are not yet able to open, we are making an extra £150 million available today to top up the non-domestic rates grants that we have been providing. This means that hospitality, tourism, leisure and non-essential retail businesses, which must remain closed, will be eligible for a third payment of between £4,000 and £5,000 to help them meet ongoing operating costs while they cannot trade. This is in addition to the announcement made earlier this week, extending the business rate holiday for retail, leisure and hospitality businesses for the whole of the next financial year. Taken together, we have made well in excess of £2 billion available to businesses over the course of the last year to help them through the pandemic. And that is over and above the support available from the UK government's schemes. This is the most generous business support scheme available anywhere in the United Kingdom. And of course, we are very pleased indeed that we have been able to offer that help and to safeguard more than 160,000 jobs in these most difficult of times. Now, I understand, of course, that other businesses and sectors will want to know when it is their turn to reopen. I understand that everybody wants a definitive date so that they can plan ahead. Unfortunately, there are very few guarantees in this pandemic. We know from our own experience and experience in Europe today just how quickly events can take a turn for the worse. The highly infectious Kent variant is now the most dominant form of the virus in Wales, and that by itself makes it even harder to predict what will happen as we begin to relax restrictions. But if we all continue to work together and remember to follow the basic rules to protect ourselves and one another, I hope we will be able to keep on taking further steps to unlock Wales at each review period during the spring. And as we look ahead to the end of April, if we continue to see an improving public health picture, we will be able to consider what more we can do to support people, to meet each other, and what we can do to continue reopening our economy, for example, looking at outdoor hospitality, the wedding sector, and leisure centres and gyms. Now, this has been a very long lockdown, and the last 12 months has been astonishingly difficult for us all. But thanks to your help and your patience, today we are able to take some real steps forward on the journey to reopen Wales, to let children return to school and friends, to let people meet and socialise together, and to let businesses begin to trade again. With your help, we will be able to go even further in the weeks ahead. In the meantime, please go on helping us to keep Wales safe by keeping yourself and your family safe too. Diolch o galon I chi gyd. As ever, I'll now take questions, and as usual, all the answers will be broadcast live on our own social media channels. And first, this afternoon, it's to Felicity Evans at BBC Wales.
First Minister, thank you very much indeed. I'd appreciate it if you could answer in both languages, please. On non-essential retail, most such retailers who have been closed throughout this lockdown did not envisage, when you said 3 weeks ago that you were planning a phased reopening, that would simply involve allowing shops that have been able to trade and be open right the way through lockdown to simply be able to sell more of their goods. Do you accept that you built up the expectations of closed non-essential retailers and have now disappointed them? And can you explain what it is that made you change your mind on this?
Well, I certainly didn't change my mind. And I think it's important that, I try every time I come to this podium to explain as carefully as I can that we remain in a public health emergency, and that we have to weigh up all the steps that we can take in the circumstances we face at the time. And 3 weeks ago, I said that I hoped today we would be able to begin to reopen non-essential retail. And that is exactly what we have been able to do. Supermarkets and other shops that are already open will, from the 22nd of March, be able to sell the full range of essential and non-essential goods. And for many people, that will mean that they will be able to purchase things that they've had to manage without for many, many weeks. Those shops who are not already open will now have a definite time frame to do all the things that they will need to do in order to be able to reopen successfully. And I know from the conversations we have had with the retail sector that that's quite a challenge in itself. People need to be able to bring staff back from furlough. They need to be able to restock so that they can open with their shelves with things on them that people can buy. They will need to demonstrate that they are able to meet the new standards, the legally required standards that we have put in place here in Wales in response to the new variant of coronavirus. And they now know that they will be able to reopen on the 12th of April alongside the reopening of non-essential retail across our border in England. I'm often told that we have to give people lots of time so that they can prepare for it. People have 4 weeks now in order to be able to do that, and provided things remain on track, they will be able to reopen on that day. And I think that offers people a decent level of certainty and the time they need to prepare. So, just i ddweud, dyn ni ddim wedi newid be ni wedi awgrymu o gwbl. Tair wythnos yn ôl, wedais i o fan hyn, oeddwn ni'n edrych ymlaen i ddechrau y proses o ail agor siopau yma yng Nghymru, a dyna beth dwi wedi cyhoeddi prynhawn yma. Mae siopau sydd agor a hyn o bryd, bydden nhw ar ailfed yr 20 o Fawrth, a'n gallu werthu popeth sydd da nhw i werthu, a dwi'n siŵr bydd hwnna yn rhywbeth dda i nifer fawr o bobl yng Nghymru sy'n gallu nawr prynu pethau maen nhw'n ddim yn wedi gallu prynu am wythnosau. Ac mae siopau eraill sydd ddim ar agor o hyn o bryd, mae amser da nhw nawr i paratoi. A mae lot o pethau i paratoi i ail agor yng nghanol mis Ebrill, gyda siopau dros y ffin yn Lloegr hefyd ar yr un diwrnod, ac i wneud hwnna mewn ffordd sy'n ofalus ac yn llwyddiannus hefyd.
Thank you very much. And as you know, the Prime Minister's roadmap for easing lockdown in England envisages all restrictions possibly being lifted from June the 21st. We know that all adults in Wales, it's hoped, will be offered at least a first dose of vaccine by the end of July. I just wonder whether you envisage the possibility during the summer in Wales that there could come a point when all restrictions are lifted, and if not, can you explain a bit more about what you see as the best case scenario for late summer, early autumn?
Well, I think the summer is a long way off in coronavirus, a story that has had so many twists and turns, so many unexpected moments, and the further we are away from today, the more this becomes pure speculation. So, of course, if everything continued to go as well as it is now, if we saw no bumps in the road, if the vaccination programme rolled out, continued to roll out as successfully as it is in Wales, then we will be able to lift restrictions further. The extent to which we will be able to do it is entirely dependent on the way that events unfold. The faster we can do it, the better, of course. Nobody wants to not see life resume in all its different aspects. But here in Wales, we will continue to do so as safely as we need in order to be able to protect the health of the public. As I said, today in Wales, we have a new variant. Nobody has any real-world experience of how that will react as we begin to lift restrictions. We have variants from other parts of the world cropping up in Wales as well as the rest of the United Kingdom. Numbers amongst the under 25-year-olds have been volatile this week and going up in a number of local authority areas in Wales, and 3/4 of the countries of Europe have rising numbers of coronavirus this week, despite having lockdown arrangements in place. So I think it is just not possible to offer people the sort of level of certainty we would all wish we could, that everything will be over by the summer. We will do everything we can to use all the headroom we can, but we will not do it in a way that is not consistent with keeping Wales safe, and certainly not, putting to one side all the enormous efforts that people have made to get us to the positive position we are in today. So y problem yw, canol y flwyddyn yn yr haf, mae'r ansicrwydd mor fawr. Does neb yn gallu ddweud beth bydd y sefyllfa yn mis Mehefin. Mae lot o pethau yng Nghymru ar hyn o bryd yn mynd yn cyfeiriad go iawn, ond mae lot o pethau hefyd bydd rhaid i ni feddwl amdan nhw. Y variant sydd da ni sy'n newydd. Y ffaith dros yn Ewrop, mae 3/4 o gwledydd yn Ewrop ble mae'r nifer o bobl sy'n dioddau o coronavirus yn cynyddu yr wythnos hon. A pethau eraill, bydd rhaid i ni cadw llygaid ofalus ar y sefyllfa a bob tro yma yng Nghymru ni'n mynd i wneud pethau mewn ffordd sy'n gallu warchod iechyd y cyhoedd. Mor gyflym ni'n gallu ailagor pethau, wrth cwrs, dyna beth ni gyd yn eisiau weld, ond ydy ni ddim yn fodlon i wneud mewn ffordd sy'n mynd i twlu popeth ni wedi wneud dros yr wythnosau ar ôl y Nadolig, a'n sydd wedi dod i ni i'r lle positif sydd da ni heddi. Firstly, thank you very much. Over to Jess Main at ITV Wales.
Thank you, First Minister. I'd like to get some more clarification, if I can, on behalf of the tourism industry. Lots of owners of self-contained accommodation will, of course, welcome the news of a potential reopening date on March the 27th. But of course, they'll be concerned about travel restrictions and other restrictions that might still be in place then. As you said, it's impossible to predict, but can you give us a sense of what you see a holiday in Wales might look like at the end of March?
Well, by the end of March, yes, I hope that we will have been able to lift the stay local arrangement, so people will be able to travel to holiday destinations. It will be self-contained accommodation only, not somewhere where facilities have to be shared, but that does include, as it did last year, when we started down this path in the same way, hotels that are able to offer room service and where people are, have all the facilities they need in their own room. The basic rules about only going with your own household, that will remain in place, and all the other restrictions that we continue to need to observe will be as true if you are in your caravan as it would if you were in your own home. And I am making the rules for people in Wales, and it's very important that owners of self-contained accommodation don't take bookings from outside Wales over Easter, because the arrangements that will apply across our border, for example, in the Prime Minister's roadmap, will not allow people in England to travel or to stay overnight away from their own homes.
Thank you, First Minister. And I just wondered as well, there's no mention in your guidance today about bubbles and socialising indoors, which some people might be thinking about. Can you give us any more indication on that?
Well, look, the most dangerous thing we do in coronavirus is to meet inside each other's homes. And household mixing was undoubtedly part of the difficulties we got ourselves into in the weeks running up to Christmas. So I said that when we come to the second half of April, after the next 6 weeks is over, then greater household contact will be one of the things we will definitely have on the table to consider. But today's changes, the changes that will come in tomorrow, are, I think, significant for households. Up until now, you've only been able to leave your own home locally and for purposes of exercise. Now you will be able to travel in your own local area. 4 people will be able to meet from 2 households for any purpose, not just exercise. And very importantly, people will be able to meet in gardens. I have letters from elderly people in particular who just aren't well enough to be able to walk to the park. So they haven't seen grandchildren or other family members for weeks and weeks. And now they will be able to meet people in their own gardens under the circumstances that we've described. And that will make a very big difference to lots of people here in Wales on the journey that we are on. And in the second half of April, if everything continues to go well, we will consider what further we can do to allow people to meet in the way that I completely understand people miss and want to be able to resume. Jess, thank you very much. To Will Hayward at Wales Online.
Thank you, First Minister. You've spoken about your fears of another wave being likely, but there is every chance that the link between pure case numbers and hospitalisations and deaths will be different if a vaccination programme stops serious illness, as we all hope. For instance, the vaccine might mean that a spike in cases doesn't inevitably lead to a spike in deaths in 3 weeks' time. So what will you be looking at to decide whether Wales needs to go into some kind of lockdown in late summer or autumn? Will a rise in cases be enough, or will you be looking at hospital admissions as well? And are you refusing to rule out another lockdown in the future?
Well, on your first and main point, Will, the important thing to say is we will always take into account a basket of measures. We don't have a sort of mechanistic approach in Wales where a rise in a particular number drives a particular action. And that will actually be even more important in the circumstances that you describe, because if vaccination does what we hope it will do, then it will reduce the risk of hospitalisation amongst those groups who are most vulnerable to falling most seriously ill. And that would make a difference to the overall calculation. But it's an overall calculation. You look at the community rates, you look at hospitalisation rates, you look at the R number, and you come to a rounded judgment based on the advice that we will get. And if I can envisage a position in which it would be possible to cope with a slightly higher rate of transmission in the community if that wasn't driving large numbers of people into hospital because vaccination had helped to prevent that. We're way off that yet. 40% of people in Wales have now been offered a first dose of the vaccine, but that means 6 out of 10 people you meet haven't at all. And even when everybody has been offered vaccination, there'll be a group of people who will choose not to take it. There'll be a group of people whose health conditions don't allow them to be vaccinated. And there'll be a group of people who have been vaccinated, but where the vaccine doesn't offer them much protection. So even in the best set of circumstances, we will have to watch very carefully the way in which the Kent variant actually behaves as we begin to lift restrictions. Nobody wants to go back to what we've had to live through twice now in terms of lengthy stay-at-home regulations. But nobody in my position would, in a responsible way, say that we would rule out doing the right thing, depending upon the circumstances we had to face at the time.
Okay, you said to Wales Online this morning that you would consider potential household bubble expansion, gym reopening and outdoor hospitality reopening in the second half of April. Is it fair to say that it's unlikely that all of these three things will be introduced at the same time, and some of them might not be until May? And if we could just have some clarification on what the plan is for people who are shielding and for driving tests and lessons as well, please.
On shielding, further advice is about to go out through the Chief Medical Officer and the Health Minister to the shielding population. As things improve, it is important that people in the shielding group can share in that improvement, while always, I know, making sensible, responsible decisions in their own circumstances. You're right. You can see from the slides that we put up, the approach we are taking is to do one thing at a time. And that is because we want to have some opportunity to be able to link cause and effect. If you do everything on a single day and then the numbers start to go up again, you will never know whether it was because you did this thing or that thing or some other easement. So our approach, something this week, something on the 22nd, another thing on the 27th, that is designed to take that step-by-step approach, and that is the approach that we will continue to have as our main way of operating. So I repeated in what I said, Will, the things I said to you earlier today about the things that would be in scope, the things we will be looking at in the second half of April. I don't want anybody to draw the conclusion from that means we would do all of those things all on the same day. Thanks, Will. Draw I Lydia Griffith, S4C.
Diolch, Brif Weinidog. Ydych chi'n poeni fod y cyfyngiadau newydd chydig yn ben agored a bod yna berygl iddyn nhw gael eu dehongli yn y ffordd yna? Mewn achlyssuron enghraifft lle mae'n rhaid cerdded drwy dirwyn i gael mynediad i ardd, neu defnyddio'r tŷ bach wrth ymweld â gardd aelwyd arall?
Wel, dwi'n becso ar bob ochr. Dwi'n becso os ydyn ni wedi wneud gormod. Dwi'n becso os ydyn ni ddim wedi defnyddio yr lle sydd da ni i codi cyfyngiadau presennol. So, bob tro, chi'n trial i dod at y pwynt ble chi'n wneud popeth chi'n gallu wneud, ond nid yn wneud gormod. So, mae pobl yn gallu dadlu wrth cwrs. Pan ni'n agor gerddi i bobl, y peth pwysig yw i bobl bod yn glir, dydy hwnna ddim yng ngwahoddiad i wneud lot o pethau eraill yn y tŷ. Pan ni'n tŷ fas, ni'n gwybod. Mae'n lot yn saffach i wneud pethau yn yr awyr agored. Dyna pam ni'n ail agor pethau yn y gerddi, nid mewn tŷ, a mae'n pwysig dros ben i ni ddweud ac ail ddweud y neges na i bobl. Lydia was asking me if there is a risk that we have reopened too much too quickly, and in particular whether allowing people to meet in gardens sends a signal to people that it is okay to do other things inside the house. And I was just replying to say that it's always a balancing act. I worry all the time, have we done too much? Have we done too little? That's why we spend the hours we do, trying to balance everything up and coming up with a package of the sort that uses the headroom we have, but continues to keep people safe. And it is very important for me to go on saying to people, many houses in Wales, the only access you have to the garden is by walking through the house, but that's what people should do. In at the front door, out to the back door and into the garden. We are much safer in the open air. That's why we are encouraging people to take advantage of meeting outside, and it's not a signal at all that it is safe or advisable to then go on and go into the kitchen or go into the bathroom or do other things that inevitably cause you and other people greater risk.
Diolch i chi. A ydych chi'n gallu darparu chydig bach mwy o eglurder ar ddwy aelwyd yn cwrdd yn yr awyr agored, sgwylwch yna? Ydy'r rheola newid yn caniatáu i rywun, enghraifft, gwrdd ag un aelwyd yn y bore ac aelwyd gwbl wahanol yn y pnawn?
Ie, dyna'r ffordd ni'n wedi cyhoeddi pethau heddi. Dyn ni ddim yn ofyn i bobl jyst i cadw at yr un aelwyd. Un aelwyd bob tro, ond chi yn gallu, dau aelwyd yn gallu dod y gilydd ar dy llun, a chi'n gallu cwrdd gyda'r aelwyd arall ar y dydd Mawrth. So, dyna'r sefyllfa 4 o bobl, nid fwy na hynny. Plant dan 11 oed hefyd, ond fwy na un aelwyd ar y tro fel na. Lydia just asking for clarity on what we mean by 2 households with 4 people meeting together. Does it always have to be the same 2 households? And I was explaining that's not what is intended. You can meet 1 household on Monday, 2 adults, 4 adults from 2 households can meet, and children under the age of 11 with them. And on the following day, you could meet another household, so long as you are sticking to those rules, no more than 4 people, no more than 2 households, and meeting outdoors. Lydia, diolch yn fawr. Over to Andy Davis at Channel 4.
First Minister, just returning to the issue of non-essential retail not opening next week, albeit with a few exceptions, how much was the decision on this driven by the impact that opening non-essential retail would have on transmission and cases, and how much by the concern that it was difficult to justify having shops open, but many thousands of children not back in the classroom?
Well, first of all, Andy, I don't think that what we are proposing is just minor. I think that for thousands and thousands of households in Wales, this now means they will be able to purchase non-essential goods that they've not been able to purchase since well before Christmas. So I think it's a significant step ahead, but it is safer to do it with shops that are open already, because they are already having to comply with all the strict standards that we strengthened in the regulations that we passed in the Senedd in January. So we know that these are safe places to visit, and I know that environmental health officers of local authorities will be visiting those settings in the coming week to make sure that they are ready to continue to operate in that way after the 22nd of March. There are a number of reasons why we didn't simply open the whole of non-essential retail in one go. First of all, as I said, the advice from the sector is that it would need time to reopen safely. They would need to be able to, as I said earlier, lots of them will need to call staff back from furlough. They will certainly have to be able to demonstrate that they can comply with the standards that prevail here in Wales. I was also anxious about opening non-essential retail in the full sense here in Wales, while no shops at all for non-essential purposes are open in England, because that acts as a perverse incentive for people to travel across the border. That would be to break the rules in England, it would be to break the rules in Wales, but you don't want to create the conditions in which it is more tempting for people to do that. So I think that this gives the sector a very clear timeline. They now know when they will all be able to reopen. It'll be the same day as shops reopen in England, so we won't have that perverse incentive. and shops have a bit of time to make sure that they are ready to invite people back safely. Just remember one final point. Sorry, that, last year we learnt that allowing somewhere to reopen does not guarantee that anybody will turn up. Customers will want to know that everything has been done to make sure that that is a venue that is safe to visit. And now there will be time for the sector to be able to demonstrate just that.
There's been considerable reaction to some of the reporting of your comments this morning about when tourists from England may be able to come to Wales. Assuming the English rules do change on April the 12th, allowing overnight stays for a single household in self-contained accommodation, can you see any reason why people from England should not be able to come to that kind of self-contained accommodation in Wales from that point?
Well, the rules in England aren't set to change. I went and checked myself on the UK government's website on this, and it is very clear on the 29th of March, and there won't be another review of their regulations for a month after that. On the 29th of March, it says no one should stay away from home overnight at this stage, minimise travel, no holidays. So that's what I was referring to. I was referring to what the English roadmap tells English citizens will be allowed or not allowed for them on the 29th of March. And I want to say again, Andy, I try and say this every time, this for me is never about England and Wales. It is about trying to discourage people from high incidence areas travelling to low incidence areas and risking the virus coming with them. We know that tourism is a very important industry in Wales, but we know that those places where tourists visit haven't seen a single visitor for many, many weeks. And there is always an anxiety in those communities that tourism should reopen safely and that their safety will be respected and thought of as well. That's why we're doing it in the way that we are. When it becomes possible across the border for people to travel and stay overnight, then we will need conversations to make sure that that can be done safely as well. The overall rates in Wales today, I think, are about half what they are in England. So there is still some space to go to bring our public health positions more into alignment with one another. When it's right to do so, we absolutely look forward to welcoming people back to Wales and to do it safely, as we did last year, and very successfully too. Andy, thank you to Gareth, Alec at the National.
It was a good effort, First Minister. It was a good effort. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch, Gareth.
There's no getting away from the fact that the police will find enforcing stay lockdown really difficult. I understand Welsh Government has been on a call this morning with the Police and Crime Commissioner for Dyfed Powys Police. So what's your message to the police on enforcement during this stay local phase?
Look, my message to the police is that they did a fantastic job of this last year, and that the Welsh Government is foursquare behind them in the approach that they have taken. So their approach has not been to reach for enforcement first. It's always been to educate, to explain, and to make sure people understand what the rules are. And it is a challenge because in a country like Wales, where you have very densely populated areas and very sparsely populated areas, you can't have a single sense of what local means. But last year, police forces across Wales took a proportionate, balanced approach to it, where people are deliberately, knowingly, and determinately breaking the law. They use enforcement regimes. Where it is a matter of conversations and persuasion, they do it that way. And I think they did it in a way that continued to command the confidence of local populations. And I'm sure that they will do it again this time.
This morning you said you're not sure you'd like to see a return of international travel this year. Several Welsh travel agents and companies have told me today that they're waiting with bated breath for the UK government's Global Travel Task Force report due on the 12th of April. What input does Welsh Government have in that task force or that report, if any? And what's your message to Welsh travel agents who are reporting a huge surge in people wanting to book holidays this year?
I think what I said, Gareth, was that I thought that the 17th of May was on the early side to be thinking about resuming international travel. I don't think I said that I couldn't see it happening at all this year, but I do definitely want it to be done in a way that does not rerun the risk of the virus being re-imported into Wales from overseas. And I definitely want the decision to be made in the full knowledge of the new variants that can crop up in other parts of the globe. So I discussed this matter with Michael Gove and the other First Ministers on Wednesday evening in our regular call. We have engagement at official level between the four governments on the work that is going on and meant to lead to a publication before too long. And that is what we will be contributing. It's not that we want to stop people going abroad. It's just that we had an experience in Wales in September where we had people coming back from many destinations in Europe and they were infected by the time they came back to Wales, and that got us off to a bad start, a difficult start in the autumn. Before we begin to reopen international travel again, we need a plan that has taken that into account and doesn't run the risk that everything we've done together over the difficult weeks around and after Christmas isn't put in jeopardy. So it's just a plea for it to be done in the most cautious, sensible, coronavirus-aware way. Gareth, diolch, a dwi'n ymryheiddio unwaith eto am yr enw. To Dan Bevan at LBC.
Thank you very much, First Minister. Good afternoon to you. There have been questions raised today about whether you've got your priorities in the right order when it comes to reopening certain sectors of society. For example, children can't go and get shoes ready for Monday when most children will be back in school, but they can go for a haircut. And similar points have also been raised about gyms and the mental and physical benefits they bring. So what's the science telling you about those particular points?
The science tells us, Dan, to do things one at a time in a step-by-step way and to start with the least risky things. And that's what we are trying to do. That's why we are reopening hairdressers and barbers before other forms of close contact services. And within a week, on the 22nd of March, children's clothes and school and shoes will be able to be purchased in places that are already open and have those things for sale. So, we're talking days here, but important days, because those days allow us to track the impact of everything that we are doing and to make sure that we don't, in a way that I don't think anybody in Wales would want to see, end up with us heading back into those very challenging days that our health service had to deal with back in January and into February. On gyms, I've already indicated that in the second half of April, they will be on the table with those other things, more household contact, wedding venues, and so on. Gyms and leisure centres will be part of what we will be thinking about then. So they've not been forgotten. It's indoors. It's inevitably more risky than things that happen outside. Outdoor gyms can reopen as of tomorrow. But we will return to the leisure centre and gym issue once we've got through the very significant package of easement that I've announced this morning.
Thank you. I want to ask you about the comments that you made in a S4C documentary that came out this week. You described the Prime Minister as, quote, really, or said he really is awful. Now that you've had time to reflect on those comments since they've been out in the public domain, do you stand by what you said, or was it something that was said in the heat of the moment after a COBRA meeting?
Well, when you're followed around by cameras for 6 months, they are absolutely, you know, recording it as it happened. So those were remarks made immediately after a meeting. They reflected my view of the way the Prime Minister had conducted that particular meeting. Thank you to Hywel Griffith at BBC News.
Diolch yn fawr. First Minister, you say your position on non-essential retail hasn't changed. A lot of retailers clearly thought they were going to open next week. They've stocked up, they've arranged the shifts. Doesn't this just prove that your system of giving indicative dates causes more confusion than clarity? Wouldn't a roadmap been a much simpler way to do things?
It simply demonstrates that people must listen carefully to what I actually say. And what I actually said is what we have actually done today. People who have made those efforts, they won't be wasted because they now know they've got the roadmap that you have asked about, because the roadmap tells them that they can reopen on the 12th of April in exactly the same way as those shops will be able to open across our border. What I said 3 weeks ago was that we would begin the process, if we could, of reopening non-essential retail. We will do that on the 22nd of March, and we'll complete it on the 12th of April. And of course, look, I completely understand that if you're running such a business, you want to reopen. Of course you do. You want to be trading, you want to be with your customers. And I understand, you know, the huge frustration they must be. I'm very glad we've been able to put another £150 million on the table today to help those businesses to bridge the 4 weeks between now and when they will be able to fully reopen. But it's always a tightrope you walk here. I've walked it several times already this morning when I'm asked about things like gyms, and I say they'll be on the table for consideration in the second half of April. You know, there may be people who think that that means they should be getting the gym ready now, but that's not what I've said. And when I said 3 weeks ago that we would begin the process, that's what I meant, and that's what we've done.
What you've also done is give supermarkets a 3-week head start on independent traders. We've spoken to some today, so it simply isn't fair. After the worst 12 months on the high street ever, you're setting them back an extra 3 weeks behind competitors.
Look, I understand that point. I think it's a point we've worried about in coming to this decision. It's 3 weeks, and supermarkets are open already. So we know they're safe and we know they're complying with the rules, and they are therefore in a better position to begin again with non-essential goods in a week's time. They will not be getting any of the £150 million that we are announcing today, because they will be trading. And we have used money in Wales, which in England has gone to supermarkets for non-domestic rate relief. We haven't offered that to the supermarket sector in Wales, and we've used that money instead, and it's been tens and tens of millions of pounds to support smaller shops and businesses that are not going to be able to reopen until April. So I understand the point, and it's a point we've taken seriously, and we've tried to address it by finding this extra sum of money. That means that while supermarkets can now sell more, they won't be getting any help. The businesses that can't open until the 12th of April will have significant further sums of money from the Welsh Government, and then let us all hope that they can do what they want to do and we want them to be able to do, which is to open, trade and carry on being successful. Hywel, diolch. Rupert Evelyn at ITN, please.
Thank you, First Minister. From Monday, you could run your hands through somebody's hair in very close proximity and cut their hair. But for some reason, you can't go into an independent golf shop like the place I'm in now. Is there any science at all that backs up that decision?
Yes, the science doesn't operate on the micro level of why this, why that, why not something else. What the science tells us is that we have to reopen the economy and society gradually, carefully and step by step, and to do the things that are safest first. So People will be able to play golf from this weekend, provided it's local and they can do it with one other household and no more than 4 people. And, you know, I have lots of letters from people looking forward to that, and I'm glad that will be able to happen. And hairdressers and barbers who operated under strict conditions last year and will only be able to operate by appointment from Monday will resume operating, because it's a sector who has gone through everything that is needed in order to operate safely, demonstrated that they had done that before, and will now be the first step in reopening close contact services. We can't do everything at once. The risk is just too great. Some things have to follow in sequence, and that's the balancing act that we have carried out over the last week, and which I have explained this morning.
Thank you. Just on self-contained accommodation and people who may or may not be tempted to cross the border, perhaps breaking the law, who is liable for that? Is it the owners of those accommodation, the people who take the booking, or those who might travel from England and break restrictions there?
Well, I think it would depend on the way in which it had happened. Very clear. Owners of that self-contained accommodation should not be taking bookings from people who live the other side of the border. That would be to, be implicated in the breaking of the regulations. But if somebody comes to a self-contained accommodation having not told the truth and evaded those responsibilities, then I don't think you could hold the owner of the accommodation liable. So I think it would just depend on how it was done. The best way for it to happen is for people to obey the rules. The rules are there for a reason. They are there to protect one another and to reflect the public health circumstances of different parts of the United Kingdom. So, that's the main message. It's not to worry about how we deal with people who evade the law. It's to ask people to go on doing what people in Wales have very certainly done, sticking to the rules, because the rules are there to protect us all. Rupert, thank you. I'm enjoying your background today. Thank you. To Adam Hale at PA.
You talked a lot about obviously the border issue here with England. What date is the earliest you can see people in England coming over to Wales with everything as it is at the moment? And would you consider implementing restrictions at that point which stop people coming over if their town or city is doing quite badly with the virus?
I've not got in my head, Adam, the next date in the English lockdown plan. It has a date of the 29th of March, and maybe the 17th of May is the next one in their plan, but it's there for anybody to check. At the point in which the rules are relaxed in England to allow people to stay overnight away and to travel, then we will look to see what the public health circumstances are at the time. When I've talked to the Prime Minister about this in the past, he's never disagreed with me that it is unadvisable for people to travel from high incidence areas to low incidence areas. Our difference has always simply been about how we enforce that piece of advice. I don't think I can anticipate how we would address it at this distance. But when the day comes when we are able safely to welcome visitors back into Wales from any part of the United Kingdom, then we'll always be very keen to do so.
Thank you. And moving away from coronavirus, you said this morning that although not top of your list, you'd be prepared to consider a 6 p.m. curfew for men on the streets to help feel safer, although since you have clarified on Twitter it's not something that you are considering. Can you rule out such a measure ever being imposed in Wales? And in relation to the safety of women, you said there are other things that can be done and that you work with third sector organisations and local authorities. What other things do you have in mind, and are you planning to implement any measures at all at the moment?
Well, first of all, to be clear, there is no curfew under consideration for men in Wales. And I'm glad, Adam, in the second part of what you asked, you turned to what is the real issue here. This is an issue of women's safety, and I'm really regret when it gets trivialised, as I would see it, into trying to make this a question about men. This is an issue of women and women's safety. A woman is killed in the United Kingdom every 3 days in the sort of circumstances that this story emanates from, and that is what we should be thinking about, and that is what we should be talking about when we think about how this can be addressed. And in Wales, we have done this already. Back in January, when we had correspondence from women saying that they did not feel safe exercising alone in the depth of winter when the nights were dark, we changed the rules so that 2 people could go out together. And that was a very direct response. I remember explaining it here from this podium to the correspondence that we had received. So it's that sort of practical action that I'm interested in. And there are things that we can do working with local authorities. Simple things like street lighting makes a difference to how safe people feel when they're not in their own homes, for example. But third sector organisations have a very important part to play in this, and already provide many services to women that are about safety and making sure that people are safe and feel safe. Tried to make that point this morning as well. It isn't just about being safe, it's about feeling safe and being confident in being able to go about your daily lives. And the police have a part to play in all of that as well. And that's where our focus should be, not in the distracting question about something that is not under consideration, but on the things that we can do together to make sure that women in Wales feel safe and are safe going about their daily lives. Adam, diolch yn fawr. Thank you for that. Over to Steve Bagnall at the Daily Post.
Thank you, First Minister. As you've pointed out, some areas currently have higher than average virus levels in Wales. North Wales is one of those regions. Could you go over any possible reasons for this, and could it affect how the region is treated compared to other parts of Wales in terms of the easing of restrictions going forward?
Well, thanks, Steve. You are right that the figures in North Wales have been, for a while now, above the levels that we are seeing in other parts of Wales, but they are falling. That is the good news. Over the whole of the North Wales area, figures fell again yesterday. It has been a bit more bumpy than in some other parts of Wales. So we had a couple of local authorities in North Wales yesterday that rose slightly, while the other 4 were falling. So I think our aim, and I think these figures give us some confidence, is that while it is taking a bit longer, North Wales is on the same journey as everywhere else, and all the things that I've announced today apply equally in North Wales as in any other part of Wales. Why the figures are as they are? Well, we know that the Kent variant entered Wales first of all in North Wales and was in faster circulation there than elsewhere. I think that lies behind it to an extent. And I think it is, we talk about North Wales as though it were one place. We know it's very different in different parts of North Wales. You've got the urban areas at the south, the northeast border, and then you've got very rural areas as you go further west. And I think that partly explains why the figures have been, as I say, a bit bumpier between authorities in North Wales, and why the pattern of falling, which is there, it's falling all the time in North Wales, and the positivity rate is falling as well. It's just not as far and as fast as we've seen elsewhere.
Thank you. And I appreciate you've just discussed the issue of cross-border travel between Wales and England. Will it depend on the rates reaching a certain level in regions on either side of the border? If so, what levels could that be? Is there a figure where it could be deemed acceptable, where it could be reintroduced?
I don't have a figure that I can offer you today. We're working this week and next week on our alert levels plan and refreshing the figures that we use there to indicate what sort of levels of the virus we would need to get to move through the plan. More generally, we say North Wales isn't all the same. Well, England is certainly not all the same, is it? And trying to treat England as though it was all one place would not make sense. At various times, there have been different approaches across the border, zoning areas by geography, zoning areas by alert levels. I think as we move ahead, the principle for me is the main thing. And the principle is that you don't want people from areas where the virus is clearly, more elevated and in more significant circulation to be travelling to places where it is very effectively suppressed. We have one local authority in Wales today where the figure per 100,000 is under 10. And you understand the anxieties of people in areas like that at the thought of people coming from areas where it's 10 times or more than that being allowed to travel. That's the issue that we'll be grappling with when the time comes. Thanks, Steve. To Rob Taylor at Wrexham.com.
Good afternoon. Wrexham, Deeside and lots of parts of Wales obviously involve cross-border work, retail, leisure and family connections. Bringing your earlier comments on the future of borders to the now, what does today's announcement mean on borders from tomorrow? And for clarity, does the rule of thumb stay local cover mileage into England, or is cross-border travel off limits?
Well, our stay local message would not stop somebody from travelling into England, but the minute they got into England, the rules there are still stay at home. So the problem is not with the Welsh rules. In that sense, they would allow somebody to go, but the minute you cross the border, you'll be breaching the regulations there. So in effect, it is for travel inside Wales that this greater flexibility can be offered at this point. I'm sure that in England they hope to move away from stay at home reasonably soon as well. But as of tomorrow, in answering your question, Rob, in Wales people will be able to travel locally. In England they will not. And therefore, if you cross the border and tried to travel, you'd be in breach of the English regulations.
Thank you. And I appreciate you've said everybody wants definitive dates and information. But today we've had queries from driving instructors, car showrooms and youth football on what these changes mean specifically for them. Are you able to give the details for those? And on perhaps a very minor but vital part of local democracy, can election candidates and their teams post leaflets from tomorrow?
I know the answer to the last question, so that's good. Yes, as from the 15th, leafleting will be allowed for election purposes. We'll be publishing guidance. It's got to be done sensibly and properly. You won't be able to, as I am very used to, going with a gang of people down the street to leaflet. It'll have to be done in more controlled circumstances than that. But yes, it will resume from Monday. We're not going to allow door-to-door canvassing in Wales at this point. I don't think it's advisable from a public health perspective, and I don't think people would understand it either. If you can't meet members of your own family, but you can meet a political canvasser, I don't see that being easy to explain. So we're not going to be doing that. In relation to the other things that you said, there will be guidance going out on a number of these points. Driving schools. Look, I understand. I hear the pleas we have from people who earn their living in that way. But the advice we have is that at this point, it's not a safe thing for us to be able to resume. It's inevitably a confined space. Two people are in it together. They're in it not just for 5 minutes, but they're in it for the length of a whole driving lesson. And things are not at this moment good enough for us to be able to say that they can resume. On some of the other matters, the children's activities, Rob, that you mentioned, then we'll be publishing guidance so people will be able to see how that's going to work out, hopefully after the 27th of March. Rob, thank you. To Thomas Moody at the South Wales Argus.
Good afternoon, First Minister. You've spoken today about the steps that non-essential retailers need to take to be able to reopen later this month. And I'm sure hairdressers and barbers are overjoyed to be able to start trading again on Monday. But is 3 days a fair amount of time for them to sort of prepared to get up and running again?
Well, important to say, it's permission to reopen. It's not an instruction to reopen. So they will, I'm sure, be barbers and hairdressers who, given 3 days, will be easily able to reopen and will want to do that. Where there are salons that need more time, then there's nothing that makes any of them open on Monday. I remember last time we did this, there was a bit of a staggered start to it all. Not everybody reopened on day one, but within a very short number of days, others were up and running, and I wouldn't be a bit surprised to see the same pattern this time.
Thank you. And you mentioned earlier that case rates in under 25s have gone up this week. Are you able to give any more information on that?
Yes, I probably could if I could find the piece of paper that I've got it on. So the rates amongst under 25s across Wales went down again yesterday, but in about half a dozen local authorities there was a rise. And we've seen that sort of number on a few days this week. So that's why we're watching it carefully. If you take the Wales-wide picture, it continues to go down. But whereas in the total population of Wales, I think we've got 2 or 3 local authorities today where there's been a small rise. It's more than twice that number for the under 25s. Now, there may be many explanations for this, and I don't want to sound that we're alarmed about it because we're just exploring what lies behind it. And when you get down to smaller numbers, and when you break these numbers down, the smaller the unit, then even small shifts at a local authority level can tip you from being, going down to looking as though you're going up. So it may just be that. There may be very specific examples. We know, for example, in one local authority in Wales, the figures have gone up. There's been an outbreak in a boarding school. In that locality, all those young people are under 25, and those numbers will have fed into the pattern we've seen. So, we are looking to see what lies behind the figures. The reason we're looking at them carefully, however, is, as I say, the numbers rising in the under 25s are higher than in the population as a whole, higher than in the over 60s, and in the past, we have seen a pattern in which if the numbers start to rise in younger people, that then spreads into people who are older than they are, and we want to make sure that we're not running that risk. Thomas, thank you very much to Alan Evans at Llanelli Online.
Thank you, First Minister. In today's easing of restrictions, you state that 4 people from 2 households will be able to meet outdoors to socialise, including in gardens. In addition, outdoor sports facilities, including basketball courts, can reopen. The First Minister will know that basketball is played by 2 teams of 5 people, not 2 groups of 4. The First Minister has said previously that the rules have to be simple because he believed the people of Wales would not understand complexities. We've seen a barrage of complaints online from businesses and parents surrounding the latest easing of rules. Would the First Minister consider revising and making changes to these rules on a week-to-week basis, given the public outcry?
I don't think there's been a public outcry, Alan. I think most people in Wales understand that there'll be a lot more that they can do from tomorrow onwards than they've been able to do for many, many weeks past. And lots of people will be looking forward very much to being able to do things now that they haven't been able to do for all that time. Look, there's a tension, isn't there? And it was in the question that you asked. If you wanted to keep things simple, then changing them every week becomes hard for people to follow. And yet you want to restore as much freedom as you can, as quickly as you can. I think what we've outlined today uses the headroom we have got to the greatest extent that it is safe for us to do so, and in the fairest way that we can restore freedoms in personal lives, in education, in the business world as well. And then, of course, if things continue to go well, and we come to the middle of April, and the numbers continue to be effectively suppressed, then we will go on to see what more we can do. But for the time being, I think it is sensible to have made an announcement. It's all going to be available for people to follow online. If They need to check what's been said, and I will stick with that for a matter of weeks. That's all. A matter of weeks, tracking the virus very carefully, looking to see where the new opportunities come.
Tomorrow, Wales may take a step closer to winning the Grand Slam if they beat Italy. Many will watch, hoping that they'll be able to go out and celebrate after the French game, while others, like Maldwyn, the hairdresser in the film Grand Slam, will be up the boulevard like a bat out of hell on Monday when the shops open. Given the results of such a Herculean effort by the population, could the First Minister give some hope and indication of when we can all sing hymns and arias and visit the local pub for family get-togethers, if, of course, councils have not forced them to remove all their outdoor furniture?
Thank you for raising the tone of the press conference with these important cultural references. If you haven't watched Grand Slam, then you probably don't have the full Welsh experience yet at your fingertips. I said earlier on that in the second half of April, we will look to see whether it is possible to begin the reopening of outdoor hospitality. And I don't think we'll be able to go further than that. You know, I'll repeat the mantra many times this afternoon already. Outdoors is safer than indoors. And we will look to restore hospitality in the same way as everything else, step by step and in a phased way. If we could reopen outdoor hospitality, well, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? We want that sector too to be able to get back to work, and we want to create safe opportunities for people to get together. But we're not at that position today. When I say that it's on the table for us to consider in the second half of April, I don't want to be misunderstood. It is just that. It will be considered alongside the other things I mentioned, the reopening of leisure centres and gyms, greater household contact, wedding venues, and then we will see, in the circumstances that we face at the time, what we can do to reopen those parts of Welsh life, but in a way that does not get us all back into the difficult days and weeks that we've just lived through. Alan, thank you very much indeed. Over to Andrew Nuttall at The Leader.
Thank you, Minister. We've been speaking to some independent gym owners here in Wrexham today who remain concerned that once again they've not been included in the latest lockdown easement plan up until April. In England, gyms have got a goal in mind of sort of reopening by April the 12th, provided that their figures continue to fall. And their concerns were mainly that they'll see people wanting to go back to the gym and they'll go to sort of closer options in England, like what happened in the summer that's just gone. And they'll worry that they'll lose business for good in some cases, which is something that's completely out of their control. So what message can you give to sort of indoor exercise venues like gyms and leisure centres who've been patiently waiting for some sort of next steps they can take since December?
Well, all I can do, Andrew, is to repeat what I've said already, that we will be considering those venues in the cycle immediately after the 12th of April. So it is not as though we are saying to that sector, it'll be months and months before you'll even be thought about. I've very explicitly said today that once we get to the 12th of April, and there'll be, if we manage to do it, a significant set of things that will happen on that day. We'll then be in the next 3-week cycle, and gyms and leisure centres will be considered in that 3 weeks. Anything you do indoors is inherently more risky than happens outdoors, and we'll have to be confident that the public health situation is sufficiently under control for that to happen. But I absolutely recognise, both the mental and physical health case that there is for resuming leisure centre and reopening gyms. I hope the fact that outdoor gyms are reopened from this weekend is a bit of a help to people. If things continue to improve, then our aim will be for more to follow.
Thank you. And it's already been touched on before, but the border between England and Wales remains a prominent issue in any sort of lockdown measure easement. It has done throughout the whole of the pandemic, and that's no different here in North Wales. We've had reports today from yourself saying that people that may sort of take advantage of the tourism sector when it reopens would lead to sort of further setbacks in terms of Wales easing lockdown. So with that in mind, what measures are sort of being put in place, or at least being considered by the government, to ensure that people are following these rules and guidance? Because throughout the whole sort of last 12 months of lockdown and sort of coronavirus, we've had to regularly report that people have come from the likes of England or even as far as Scotland in some cases to visit Wales repeatedly, and it just doesn't seem to be getting across that people shouldn't be travelling. Do you think now is time to sort of tighten the borders and sort of stop people visiting?
No, I've never thought of this as a border issue per se. As I say every time, it's about trying to make sure that high incidence areas don't travel to low incidence areas and create difficulties. It's for other parts of the United Kingdom, isn't it? It's their responsibility to enforce the rules that are in place there. And when we reopen self-contained accommodation here, as we hope we can, from the 27th of March, the rules in England will still not allow people to travel into Wales to visit places here. So the enforcement is for the country where the rules are in place. We will be discussing, as we have been today, and we'll go on next week, with our police forces, whether there is anything further we need to do together to make sure they have the powers they need to respond if people break the rules and come across the border. We talked a lot about it last year, and I absolutely understand the anxieties that it gives rise to. In the end, it was pretty well managed, and most people everywhere want to obey the rules, understand why they should obey the rules, and we didn't see in any way that caused things to go badly awry, people coming across the border and creating those difficulties. Some do. There are always some people who think the rules don't apply to them, and we have to respond to them. But the great bulk of people in Wales and in England as well want to do the right thing, and that's what we'll be encouraging them to go on doing. Andrew, thank you to Nathan Shoesmith at the speaker.
Thank you, First Minister. Good afternoon. Following on from the question just there to start with, while there's some questions over its opening ahead of other venues, many people will be thrilled to hear that hairdressers are reopening next week, including people in border regions on the England and Wales border. Will there be the same responsibility for businesses such as in the tourism industry as you've outlined to ensure that people do not come over from England? And is there anything more specific you'd say to people that would be tempted to travel short distance from England over to Wales so that they can get a haircut a month earlier?
Well, I should declare an interest in understanding the pressures people feel to get a haircut. But the rules are clear. You must obey the rules of the country in which you are resident. And the rules in England would not allow people to travel across the border to come into Wales for a haircut or for any other purpose other than the ones that we've always acknowledged, for work or for hospital treatment or whatever that would be. So I think it's probably harder for the hairdressing industry to police that than it is for self-contained accommodation, because people will have to make an appointment and inquiries could be made then. The real answer is for people to obey the rules.
Thank you. And on the stay local message, what would you say to people that are thinking about travelling to sort of outdoor gyms, outdoor sports facilities, knowing the positive impact that can have on people's mental health, but aren't sure whether their nearest facility is classed as local? Would you still encourage people to sort of get outside and manage their mental health through such facilities, even if it isn't necessarily quite local?
Look, I just encourage people to use their judgment and to use their sense of proportionality. The Chief Medical Officer always says, I know he said it from where I'm standing many times, that taking exercise outdoors is a low-risk activity and good for people's well-being. for many, many people within a reasonable distance of their own homes, there will now be opportunities that they've not been able to take advantage of for many weeks. Whether that is simply going to the beach and walking along, whether it's going to a park that you've not been able to get to and taking a walk there, or, you know, if you are a player of golf or of tennis and there is somewhere within your local area, you'll be able to go to that as well. We've always said, what is local has to be understood in your own context. From where I live, in Cardiff, you could be at a golf course or at a tennis court within a 5-mile radius. If I were living in a more rural part of Wales, I would have to calibrate that accordingly. And we did this last year, and people will fall back, I know, on their recollections of that, and as then, people will make decisions in a sensible and pragmatic way, and I'm happy to rely on the good sense of people in Wales and everything that we have done together in recent weeks to keep the virus at bay and with numbers falling. Nathan, thank you finally today to Tom Magna at Carers World Live.
Thank you very much indeed, First Minister. Can I bring you back to the subject of vaccines? Your government insisted that unpaid carers largely have to register through an online vaccination eligibility form. When it was eventually launched last Monday, I, along with viewers, found that you were directed to the list of health boards. At that time, only Cardiff and Vale led direct to the form. The remaining 6 led only to an information page with no idea where the form was to be found. Viewers are telling us that they're confused, frustrated, and left with a feeling that they'll be the last to be vaccinated in the rush to give everyone the jab. It seems that some health boards aren't ready, we hear. I'd be interested to hear how you view this somewhat unsatisfactory situation.
Well, I do know that health boards are, all of them, working hard under enormous pressure, and we're asking huge amounts of them in order to be able to put everything in place. Nobody is, standing back idly, but there are things that do need to happen, and not every health board manages it all as quickly as others. The good news, though, Tom, isn't it, is for all those people who are now going to be able to get a vaccine, that the programme continues to power ahead. 38,000 people recorded as having been vaccinated yesterday, the biggest number we've ever had. And we've got a very good supply of vaccine in Wales this week, and I expect those numbers to look like that over the next few days. And while we are moving ahead as fast as that, over 1% of the whole population of Wales were vaccinated yesterday, then the people who you worry about, and we worry about, it will not be long before any of them have to wait to get the vaccine that they need.
Thank you for that answer. I think our viewers would probably say that in speeding ahead, you're leaving them behind. So can I just add another element to this? We're hearing that some GP surgeries are saying that they don't know what to do and are rejecting legitimate unpaid carers. The online form appears to be set up with its criteria to reflect the news buried in your website that not all unpaid carers will get the jabs as a priority. Isn't all of this taking everything into account, letting down unpaid carers after the implication of your promise on the 29th of January that they would be higher rather than lower in band 6?
We have taken in Wales a more expansive view of what an unpaid carer needs to be in order to qualify for Group 6, and I think the advice that came originally from the JCVI would have expected. So we have done our best to push the boundaries of it, but there have to be boundaries. And I know we've rehearsed this a number of times, but if we simply had a system in which anybody could self-declare that they are a carer and that's all you had to do, then the result would be that they would be people coming in for vaccination, taking advantage of that, and genuine bona fide carers would find themselves having to wait longer. The good news for everybody, and I absolutely want those people who do such an important job to get the vaccine as fast as we can, is that we are on track to offer vaccination to everybody in those top 9 priority groups by the middle of April. So that timescale is, we're biting into that timescale every single day, aren't we? So we're talking about a short number of weeks. I hope that unpaid carers get the vaccine as fast as possible in every part of Wales. But even when there are some hold-ups or the forms aren't as clear as they need to, we're talking about a small number of weeks now, and everybody on those lists will have got what they need. And I look forward very much to that being the case. Thank you all very much indeed. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
Yeah, good weekend.
Thanks. Cheers, everyone.
Cheers. Take care, guys.
Cheers, everyone. Good weekend to all. Cheers. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.